Hi, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. Today we're reading from Black Beauty, starting with chapter 26, How It Ended. It must have been nearly midnight when I heard at a great distance the sound of a horse's feet. Sometimes the sound died away, then it grew clearer again and nearer. The road to Earlshall led through the woods that belonged to the Earl. The sound came from that direction, and I hoped it might be someone coming in search of us. As the sound came nearer and nearer, I was almost sure I could distinguish Ginger's step. A little nearer still, and I could tell she was in the dog-cart. I neighed loudly and was overjoyed to hear an answering neigh from Ginger and men's voices. They came slowly over the stones and stopped at the dark figure that lay upon the ground. One of the men jumped out and stooped down over it. "It is Reuben," he said, "and he does not stir." The other man followed and bent over him. "He's dead," he said. "Feel how cold his hands are." They raised him up, but there was no life, and his hair was soaked with blood. They laid him down again and came and looked at me. They soon saw my cut knees. "Why, the horse has been down and thrown him. Who would have thought the black horse would have done that? Nobody thought he could fall. Reuben must have been lying here for hours. Odd, too, that the horse has not moved from the place." Robert then attempted to lead me forward. I made a step, but almost fell again. "Halloo! He's bad in his foot as well as in his knees. Look here, his hoof is cut all to pieces. He might well come down, poor fellow. I tell you what, Ned, I'm afraid he hasn't been all right with Reuben. Just think of his riding a horse over these stones without a shoe. Why, if he had been in his right senses, he would just as soon have tried to ride him over the moon. I'm afraid it has been the old thing over again." Poor Susan, she looked awfully pale when she came to my house to ask if he had not come home. She made believe she was not a bit anxious and talked of a lot of things that might have kept him, but for all that she begged me to go and meet him. But what must we do? There's the horse to get home as well as the body, and that will be no easy matter. Then followed a conversation between them till it was agreed that Robert the groom should lead me and that Ned must take the body. It was a hard job to get it into the dog-cart, for there was no one to hold Ginger, but she knew as well as I did what was going on, and stood as still as a stone. I noticed that because, if she had a fault, it was that she was impatient in standing. Ned started off very slowly with his sad load, and Robert came and looked at my foot again. Then he took his handkerchief and bound it closely round, and so he led me home. I shall never forget that night walk. It was more than 3 miles. Robert led me on very slowly, and I limped and hobbled on as well as I could with great pain. I am sure he was sorry for me, for he often patted and encouraged me, talking to me in a pleasant voice. At last I reached my own box and had some corn, and after Robert had wrapped up my knees in wet cloths, he tied up my foot in a bran poultice to draw out the heat and cleanse it before the horse doctor saw it in the morning. I managed to get myself down on the straw and slept in spite of the pain. The next day, after the farrier had examined my wounds, he said he hoped the joint was not injured, and if so, I should not be spoiled for work, but I should never lose the blemish. I believe they did the best to make a good cure, but it was a long and painful one. Proud flesh, as they called it, came up in my knees and was burnt out with caustic. And when at last it was healed, they put a blistering fluid over the front of both knees to bring all the hair off. They had some reason for this, and I suppose it was all right. As Smith's death had been so sudden, and no one was there to see it, there was an inquest held. The landlord and hostler at the White Lion, with several other people, gave evidence that he was intoxicated when he started from the inn. The keeper of the toll gate said he rode at a hard gallop through the gate, and my shoe was picked up among the stones, so that the case was quite plain to them, and I was cleared of all blame. Everybody pitied Susan. She was nearly out of her mind. She kept saying over and over again, "Oh, he was so good, so good. It was all that cursed drink. Oh, Reuben, Reuben." So she went on till after he was buried, and then as she had no home or relation, she, with her 6 little children, was obliged once more to leave the pleasant home by the tall oak trees and go into that great, gloomy Union House. Chapter 27. Ruined and Going Downhill. As soon as my knees were sufficiently healed, I was turned into a small meadow for a month or 2. No other creature was there, and though I enjoyed the liberty and the sweet grass, yet I had been so long used to society that I felt very lonely. Ginger and I had become fast friends, and now I missed her company extremely. I often neighed when I heard horses' feet passing in the road, but I seldom got an answer, till one morning the gate was opened, and who should come in but dear old Ginger. The man slipped off her halter and left her there. With a joyful whinny, I trotted up to her. We were both glad to meet, but I soon found that it was not for our pleasure that she was brought to be with me. Her story would be too long to tell, but the end of it was that she had been ruined by hard riding and was now turned off to see what rest would do. Lord George was young and would take no warning. He was a hard rider and would hunt whenever he could get the chance, quite careless of his horse. Soon after I left the stable, there was a steeplechase, and he determined to ride. Though the groom told him she was a little strained and was not fit for the race, he did not believe it, and on the day of the race urged Ginger to keep up with the foremost riders. With her high spirit, she strained herself to the utmost. She came in with the first 3 horses, but her wind was touched, besides which he was too heavy for her, and her back was strained. And so, she said, here we are, ruined in the prime of our youth and strength, you by a drunkard and I by a fool. It is very hard. We both felt in ourselves that we were not what we had been. However, that did not spoil the pleasure we had in each other's company. We did not gallop around as we once did, but we used to feed and lie down together and stand for hours under one of the shady lime trees with our heads close to each other, and so we passed our time until the family returned from town. One day we saw the Earl come into the meadow, and York was with him. Seeing who it was, we stood still under our lime tree and let them come up to us. They examined us carefully. The Earl seemed much annoyed. "There is 300 pounds flung away for no earthly use," said he. "But what I care for most is that these horses of my old friend, who they thought they would find a good home with me, are ruined. The mare shall have a 12-months run, and we shall see what that will do for her, but the black one must be sold. 'Tis a great pity, but I could not have knees like these in my stables." "No, my lord, of course not," said York, "but he might get a place where appearance is not much of consequence, and still be well treated. I know a man in Bath, the master of some livery stables, who often wants a good horse at a low figure. I know he looks well after his horses. The inquest cleared the horse's character, and your lordship's recommendation, or mine, would be sufficient warrant for him. You had better write to him, York. I should be more particular about the place than the money he would fetch." After this they left us. "They'll soon take you away," said Ginger. "I shall lose the only friend I have, and most likely we shall never see each other again. 'Tis a hard world." About a week after this, Robert came into the field with a halter, which he slipped over my head and led me away. There was no leave-taking of Ginger. We neighed to each other as I was led off, and she trotted anxiously along by the hedge, calling to me as long as she could hear the sound of my feet. Through the recommendation of York, I was bought by the master of the stables. I had to go by train, which was new to me, and required a good deal of courage the first time, but as I found the puffing, rushing, whistling, and more than all the trembling of the horse box in which I stood did me no real harm, I soon took it quietly. When I reached the end of my journey, I found myself in a tolerably comfortable stable, and well attended to. These stables were not so airy and pleasant as those I had been used to. The stalls were laid on a slope instead of being level, and as my head was kept tied to the manger, I was always obliged to stand on the slope, which was very fatiguing. Men do not seem to know yet that horses can do more work if they can stand comfortably and can turn about. However, I was well fed and well cleaned, and on the whole I think our master took as much care of us as he could. He kept a good many horses and carriages of different kinds for hire. Sometimes his own men drove them. At others, the horse and chaise were let to gentlemen or ladies who drove. Chapter 28. A Job Horse and His Drivers. Hitherto, I had always been driven by people who at least knew how to drive. But in this place, I was to get my experience of all the different kinds of bad and ignorant driving to which we horses are subjected, for I was a job horse and was let out to all sorts of people who wished to hire me. As I was good-tempered, I think I was oftener let out to the ignorant drivers than some of the other horses, because I could be depended upon. It would take a long time to tell of all the different styles in which I was driven, but I will mention a few of them. First, there were the tight rein drivers. Men who seemed to think that all depended on holding the reins as hard as they could, never relaxing the pull on the horse's mouth or giving him the least liberty of movement. They are always talking about keeping the horse well in hand and holding a horse up, just as if a horse was not made to hold himself up. Some poor broken-down horses, whose mouths have been made hard and insensible by just such drivers as these, may perhaps find some support in it. But for a horse who can depend upon his own legs and who has a tender mouth and is easily guided, it is not only tormenting, but it is stupid. Then there are the loose rein drivers, who let the reins lie easily on our backs and their hands rest lazily on their knees. Of course, such gentlemen have no control over a horse if anything happens suddenly. If a horse shies or starts or stumbles, they are nowhere and cannot help the horse or themselves till the mischief is done. I had no objection to it, as I was not in the habit of either starting or stumbling, and had only been used to depend upon my driver for guidance and encouragement. Still, one likes to feel the rein a little in going downhill, and likes to know that one's driver has not gone to sleep. Besides, a slovenly way of driving gets a horse into bad and often lazy habits, and when he changes hands he has to be whipped out of them with more or less pain and trouble. Squire Gordon always kept us to our best paces and our best manners. He said that spoiling a horse and letting him get into bad habits was just as cruel as spoiling a child, and both had to suffer for it afterwards. Besides, these drivers are often careless altogether and will attend to anything else more than their horses. I went out in the phaeton one day with one of them. He had a lady and 2 children behind. He flopped the reins about as we started and gave me several unmeaning cuts with the whip, though I was fairly off. There had been a good deal of road mending going on, and even where the stones were not freshly laid down, there were a great many loose ones about. My driver was laughing and joking with the lady and the children, and talking about the country to the right and to the left, but he never thought it worthwhile to keep an eye on his horse or to drive on the smoothest parts of the road, and so it happened that I got a stone in one of my forefeet. Now, if Mr. Gordon or John, or in fact any good driver, had been there, he would have seen that something was wrong before I had gone 3 paces. Or even if it had been dark, a practiced hand would have felt by the rein that there was something wrong in the step, and they would have got down and picked out the stone. But this man went on laughing and talking, while at every step the stone became more firmly wedged between my shoe and the frog of my foot. The stone was sharp on the inside and round on the outside, which, as everyone knows, is the most dangerous kind that a horse can pick up, at the same time cutting his foot and making him most liable to stumble and fall. Whether the man was partly blind or only very careless, I can't say, but he drove me with that stone in my foot for a good half-mile before he saw anything. By that time I was going so lame with the pain that at last he saw it and called out, "Well, here's a go! Why, they have sent us out with a lame horse! What a shame!" He then chucked the reins and flipped about with the whip, saying, "Now then, it's no use playing the old soldier with me. There's the journey to go, and it's no use turning lame and lazy." Just at this time a farmer came riding up on a brown cob. He lifted his hat and pulled up. "I beg your pardon, sir," he said, "but I think there is something the matter with your horse. He goes very much as if he had a stone in his shoe. If you will allow me, I will look at his feet. These loose scattered stones are confounded dangerous things for the horses." "He's a hired horse," said my driver. "I don't know what's the matter with him, but it is a great shame to send out a lame beast like this." The farmer dismounted and took up my near foot. "Bless me, there's a stone. Lame! I should think so." At first he tried to dislodge it with his hand, but as it was now very tightly wedged, he drew a stone pick out of his pocket and very carefully, and with some trouble, got it out. Then holding it up, he said, "There, that's the stone your horse had picked up. It is a wonder he did not fall down and break his knees into the bargain." "Well, to be sure," said my driver, "that is a queer thing. I never knew that horses picked up stones before." "Didn't you?" said the farmer rather contemptuously. "But they do, though, and the best of them will do it, and can't help it sometimes on such roads as these. And if you don't want to lame your horse, you must look sharp and get them out quickly. This foot is very much bruised," he said, setting it down gently and patting me. "You had better drive him gently for a while. The foot is a good deal hurt, and the lameness will not go off directly." Then mounting his cob and raising his hat to the lady, he trotted off. Needless to say, I was very grateful to him. When he was gone, my driver began to flop the reins about and whip the harness, by which I understood that I was to go on, which of course I did, glad that the stone was gone, but still in a good deal of pain. This was the sort of experience we job horses often came in for. Chapter 29. Cockneys. Then there is the steam engine style of driving. These drivers were mostly people from towns who never had a horse of their own and generally traveled by rail. They always seemed to think that a horse was something like a steam engine, only smaller. At any rate, they think that if only they pay for it, a horse is bound to go just as far and just as fast and with just as heavy a load as they please. And be the roads heavy and muddy or dry and good, be they stony or smooth, uphill or downhill, it is all the same. On one must go at the same pace with no relief and no consideration. These people never think of getting out to walk up a steep hill. Oh no, they have paid to ride, and ride they will. The horse? Oh, he's used to it. What were horses made for if not to drag people uphill? Walk? A good joke indeed. And so the whip is plied and the rein is chucked, and often a rough scolding voice cries out, "Go along, you lazy beast!" And then another slash of the whip, when all the time we are doing our very best to get along, uncomplaining and obedient, though often sorely harassed and downhearted. This steam engine style of driving wears us out faster than any other kind. I would far rather go 20 miles with a good, considerate driver than I would go 10 with some of these. It would take less out of me. Another thing, they scarcely ever put on the brake, however steep the downhill may be, and thus bad accidents sometimes happen. Or if they do put it on, they often forget to take it off at the bottom of the hill. More than once I have had to pull halfway up the next hill with one of the wheels held by the brake before my driver chose to think about it, and that is a terrible strain on a horse. Then these cockneys, instead of starting at an easy pace as a gentleman would do, generally set off at full speed from the very stable yard. And when they want to stop, they first whip us and then pull up so suddenly that we are nearly thrown on our haunches and our mouths jagged with the bit. They call that pulling up with a dash. When they turn a corner, they do it as sharply as if there were no right or wrong side of the road. I well remember one spring evening, Rory and I had been out for the day. Rory was the horse that usually went with me when a pair was ordered, and a good honest fellow he was. We had our own driver, and as he was always considerate and gentle with us, we had a very pleasant day. We were coming home at a good smart pace about twilight. Our road turned sharp to the left, but as we were close to the hedge on our own side and there was plenty of room to pass, our driver did not pull us in. As we neared the corner, I heard a horse and 2 wheels coming rapidly down the hill toward us. The hedge was high and I could see nothing, but the next moment we were upon each other. Happily for me, I was on the side next the hedge. Rory was on the left side of the pole and had not even a shaft to protect him. Excuse me. The man who was driving was making straight for the corner, and when he came in sight of us, he had no time to pull over to his own side. The whole shock came upon Rory. The gig shaft ran right into his chest, making him stagger back with a cry that I shall never forget. The other horse was thrown upon his haunches and one shaft broken. It turned out that it was a horse from our own stables, with the high-wheeled gig that the young men were so fond of. The driver was one of those random, ignorant fellows who don't even know which is their own side of the road, or if they know, don't care. And there was poor Rory with his flesh torn open and bleeding, and the blood streaming down. They said if it had been a little more to one side, it would have killed him, and a good thing for him, poor fellow, if it had. As it was a long time before the wound healed, and then he was sold for coal carting. And what that is up and down those steep hills only horses know. Some of the sights I saw there where a horse had to come downhill with a heavily loaded 2-wheeled cart behind him, on which no brake could be placed, make me sad even now to think of. After Rory was disabled, I often went in the carriage with a mare named Peggy, who stood in the next stall to mine. She was a strong, well-made animal of a bright dun color, beautifully dappled and with a dark brown mane and tail. There was no high breeding about her, but she was very pretty and remarkably sweet-tempered and willing. Still, there was an anxious look about her eye by which I knew that she had some trouble. The first time we went out together, I thought she had a very odd pace. She seemed to go partly a trot, partly a canter, 3 or 4 paces, and then a little jump forward. It was very unpleasant for any horse who pulled with her and made me quite fidgety. When we got home, I asked her what made her go in that odd, awkward way. "Ah," she said in a troubled manner, "I know my paces are very bad, but what can I do? It really is not my fault. It is just because my legs are so short. I stand nearly as high as you, but your legs are a good 3 inches longer above your knee than mine, and of course you can take a much longer step and go much faster. You see, I did not make myself. I wish I could have done so. I would have had long legs then. All my troubles come from my short legs," said Peggy in a desponding tone. "But how is it, I said, when you are so strong and good-tempered and willing?" "Why, you see," said she, "men will go so fast, and if one can't keep up to other horses, it is nothing but whip, 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 all the time. And so I have had to keep up as I could, and have got into this ugly, shuffling pace. It was not always so. When I lived with my first master, I always went a good regular trot. But then he was not in such a hurry. He was a young country clergyman, and a good, kind master. He had 2 churches a good way apart, and a great deal of work, but he never scolded or whipped me for not going faster. Excuse me. He was very fond of me. I only wish I was with him now, but he went to a large town, and then I was sold to a farmer. Some farmers, you know, are capital masters, but I think this one was a low sort of man. He cared nothing about good horses or good driving. He only cared for going fast. I went as fast as I could, but that would not do, and he was always whipping, so I got into this way of making a spring forward to keep up. On market nights he used to stay very late at the inn, and then drive home at a gallop. One dark night he was galloping home as usual, when all on a sudden the wheel came against some great heavy thing in the road and turned the gig over. He was thrown out, and his arm was broken, and some of his ribs, I think. At any rate, it was the end of my living with him, and I was not sorry. But you see, it will be the same everywhere for me, if men must go so fast. I wish my legs were longer." Poor Peggy! I was very sorry for her, and I could not comfort her, for I knew how hard it was upon slow-paced horses to be put with fast ones. All the whipping comes to their share, and they can't help it. She was often used in the phaeton, and was very much liked by some of the ladies because she was so gentle. And sometime after this, she was sold to 2 ladies who themselves drove and wanted a safe, good horse. I met her several times out in the country, going a good, steady pace, and looking as contented as a horse could be. I was glad to see her, for she deserved a good place. After she left us, another horse came in her stead. He was young and had a bad name for shying and starting, by which he had lost a good place. I asked him why. I asked him what had made him shy. "Well, I hardly know," he said. "I was timid when I was young, and was a good deal frightened several times, and if I saw anything strange I used to turn and look at it. You see, with our blinkers one can't see or understand what a thing is unless one looks around. Then my master always gave me a whipping, which of course made me start on, and did not make me less afraid. I think if he would have let me just look at things quietly and see that there was nothing to hurt me, it would have been all right, and I should have got used to them." Excuse me. One day an old gentleman was riding with him, and a large piece of white paper or rag blew across just on one side of me. I shied and started forward. My master, as usual, whipped me smartly, but the old man cried out, "You're wrong! You're wrong! You should never whip a horse for shying. He shies because he is frightened, and you only frighten him more and make the habit worse. So I suppose all men don't do so. I am sure I don't want to shy for the sake of it, but how should one know what is dangerous and what is not if one is never allowed to get used to anything? I am never afraid of what I know. Now, I was brought up in a park where there were deer. Of course, I knew them as well as I did a sheep or a cow, and they are not common, and I know many sensible horses who are frightened at them, and who kick up quite a shindy before they will pass a paddock where there are deer. I knew what my companion said was true, and I wished that every young horse had as good masters as Farmer Gray and Squire Gordon. Of course, we sometimes came in for good driving here. I remember one morning I was put into the light gig and taken to a house in Pulteney Street. 2 gentlemen came out. The taller of them came round to my head. He looked at the bit and bridle, and just shifted the collar with his hand to see if it fitted comfortably. "Do you consider this horse wants a curb?" he said to his hostler. "Well," said the man, "I should say he would go just as well without. He has an uncommon good mouth, and though he has a fine spirit, he has no vice. But we generally find people like the curb." "I don't like it," said the gentleman. "Be so good as to take it off and put the rein in at the check. An easy mouth is a great thing on a long journey, is it not, old fellow?" he said, patting my neck. Then he took the reins, and they both got up. I can remember now how quietly he turned me round, and then with a light feel of the rein and drawing the whip gently across my back, we were off. I arched my neck and set off at my best pace. I found I had someone behind me who knew how a good horse ought to be driven. It seemed like old times again and made me feel quite gay. This gentleman took a great liking to me, and after trying me several times with the saddle, he prevailed upon my master to sell me to a friend of his who wanted a safe, pleasant horse for riding. And so it came to pass that in the summer I was sold to Mr. Barry. We'll stop there and start with chapter 30 next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.